That the motion be agreed to. Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Mr Speaker, there are times in this Parliament when a history is made, and tonight has been one of them. The member who is the author of this bill thanked the Commerce Select Committee, of which I'm a member, for their assistance. And indeed, I've got to say that members of the Commerce Select Committee, after dealing with this piece of legislation, felt like the collective guys with the shovels following the elephant, big time. And I've got to say that I thought Mr Goldsmith, a writer of some repute, a man who has penned many literary works, including, I think, a biography, you'll correct me, of Don Brash, and then some interesting works regarding to that notable Member of Parliament, John Archibald Banks, some known to us here colloquially and affectionately as Brownbag Banks. But when it came to this piece of legislation, I have to say to Mr Goldsmith, you would have thought it had been written by the local village idiot. This is a piece of legislation which presumably the whips or somebody in the hierarchy of the National Party said, look, we need a private member's bill, we need to throw a few in the ballot to cut Labor's chances and the Greens' chances down, so can somebody somewhere come up with a few pages of drivel so we can bang it in, but like, take a lotto ticket.
And Paul said yes.
And Paul said yes. There's an old military phrase, never volunteer. Never volunteer. And I've got to say this was pure spin, pure bunkum, and Mr Goldsmith is right in one thing, in that the Commerce Select Committee, jealous of Mr Goldsmith, hell no, I've got to say, not on this one. And a man who has on his CV the biography of John Archibald Banks, I'm told, sir, he got sidetracked. This is why this bill is in trouble, because he got sidetracked. He got sidetracked because apparently he is writing the trilogy to John Archibald Banks, the penultimate work. I think it's going to be entitled to John Banks, Looking Through Striped Sunshine, or something like that. From Behind the Wire, or something like that. Because this will be the final chapter, the penultimate chapter in the career of one John Archibald Banks. But I got to say, when I heard Mr Goldsmith talking about this, I heard three words. I heard the word fleece, fraud, and defendant. And I've got to say, I thought of John Banks again. Mr Goldsmith was quoting ancient legal cases. Now, Mr O'Rourke's a lawyer. He'll take up this point, I'm sure, because unlike me, he's got a legal mind. I'm not a lawyer. But fleecing, fraudulent activity, and the defendant. Now, if that isn't a case, maybe Mr Goldsmith could answer this question. Did the Honourable John Archibald Banks act as a consultant in respect of this bill? Fleecing, fraudulent behaviour, and the defendant, I think, are three concepts that Mr Banks, if he's around, and I'm sure he'll take a call at some point, could give us many hours of dissertation on. Fleecing, fraudulent behaviour, and being the defendant. After all, he's been the defendant 3 times, convicted twice, up on the 3rd strike. And then we look at the bill, and it talks about offer and acceptance. It talks about offer and acceptance. Now, Samuel Dyinger, again a lawyer, he will know this, you'll recall his Stage 101 law classes, offer and acceptance. And I'm just wondering if Mr Goldsmith, as he put this piece of drivel together, actually consulted John Archibald Banks. He had the offer, he accepted, and he's now the defendant. Who got fleeced? I'd say .com. But, who knows? I got to say, this should have been encompassed in a statutes amendment bill. When it arrived at the committee, it even failed to clear up ambiguities in electronic contract acceptance by not defining when the contract, quote-unquote, arrived at the recipient's electronic address. That's how much effort, intellectual rigour was put into this legislation. He couldn't even define the word arrived, when it arrived, when offer and acceptance had. This is the drivel that was put in place. So I say to Mr Goldsmith, who I know is hanging on every word, I just say, if he paid the John Archibald Banks a consultancy fee to consult on this bill, he should ask for his money back. He should ask for his money back because a fraud has been committed, because Mr Banks was obviously offering advice, well, maybe he did have a qualification for it, actually, and did that advice arrive in a brown paper plain bag? I don't know. So I just say to Mr Goldsmith, surely there is a lesson in here for you. Next time the whips ask for a volunteer, I say to Mr Goldsmith, don't volunteer, because this is drivel. This is absolute drivel. It wrongly defined, badly drafted, and I presume it never made its way anywhere near the clerk's office for the assistance that we can ascertain in drafting legislation, because the clerks would have looked at this and gone, oh my God, how do we fix this? So it obviously got nowhere near the clerk's expertise or any legal mind or any intelligent mind of any kind. It was just hashed together as a bit of political spin that is substandard. And I got to say, I can't recall the amount of money per hour, maybe the Speaker or somebody else could remind me, that it actually costs to run this place per hour. And Mr Goldsmith, in his political career, has been one that's railed against wasteful expenditure, as had Mr Banks, even though in his last term as Mayor he trebled the debt of the Auckland City Council, the big spender. He trebled the debt of the Auckland City Council. So I don't know how many dollars, how many thousands of dollars it takes to run this Parliament hour after hour. And it's a disgrace that we are wasting taxpayers' money tonight dealing with a political stunt and political drivel which was so badly drafted that the Commerce Committee spent hours trying to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. We did our best. We shovelled behind the elephant. We tried to get something with a semblance of intelligence back into this chamber, wasting taxpayers' money every hour that we did it. So I say to the opposition, and I look forward to the next speaker, to the government, I look forward to the next speaker who'll get up and have a crack at this. If you can't even define the word arrived in your draft legislation that goes before a select committee, you can't define offer and acceptance, you shouldn't be in this Parliament. Now, I got one private member's bill through, that was the boy racer stuff. And luckily, I had a lot of good, sound minds to lean on, both in my party, in the bureaucracy, and in other places. And it was actually adopted by a government and got through, and hopefully, contributed to doing a little bit of good works around the country. But I've got to say, this is political drivel. This is a political pamphlet. But I've got to say, it's very apt. When the owner of the bill, the sponsor of the bill, gets up, John Banks's biographer, and talks about fleecing, fraud, and the defendant, and quotes legal cases, then we know he's still under the influence of that very special mind in the Parliament, John Archibald Banks. The rotten pile, one of two, including Peter Dunn, that props this crew up over here. It is very, very telling that this bill deals with offer and acceptance, Mr Speaker. Because we know, of course, Mr Banks was offered and accepted and got the brown bag and then doesn't want to admit it. And he's going to pay a price for that. So I just say to the National Party, fair go. Let's treat the people out there with a bit of respect. They aren't numbskulls. They aren't stupid. They are intelligent in our communities, and they can smell and see bull when it's put before them. And this is pretty substandard stuff. Those members over there know it does not make sense, know that it makes very little contribution to the body politic, but I suppose again there's a correlation with Mr Banks in that when he was Small Business Minister, he introduced a piece of legislation that abolished 31 acts that did not exist. Another classic and historical moment in this Parliament. So I say to Mr Goldsmith, next time don't volunteer, but I will buy a copy of the book when it comes out, John Banks Behind the Wire.
Honourable Chris Tremaine.
Mr Speaker, Mr Cosgrove has painted a very